Lawyers of Reddit, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose and why? Not quite, but I did a trial where I won and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job and he thought I was excellent in trial. It was tough because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present. So it left me feeling weird. Oh yes. A high-maintenance divorce client that was pitching a fit BC she was going to have to pay $60 per month in child support. She wanted a recalculation and I was praying she would have to pay more. That's nothing, assuming there wasn't maintenance for the other spouse. My dad was paying $700 to my mother for me when I wasn't even living with her. Family law is tiring. On the regular. Honestly, if I wasn't rooting for my client to lose, corporate litigation mostly, never worked alone. By the time I was done working with them I considered it a small victory. This was a main reason I'm what they call a recovering attorney now. Do an AMA. This kinda shit is what Reddit used to be about. Not some promotional BS AMA. I can't really breach client confidences, but reading corporate emails by the truckload often makes me remark how careless many office drones and even executives could be with company-issued email accounts. In the early wilder days of the internet, many people didn't fully understand how fast things could travel. I got to read about intra-office extramarital affairs, complete with super cringe love poetry, and all sorts of executive backstabbing. The executives at the European companies, not so much in the USA, seemed to have a penchant for sending their favorite porn around. But none of that was really why I didn't like the clients. There was one company where the execs were big on canned game hunts both in the USA and abroad. And another where they seem to spend some crazy amount of money on lobbyists that make almost every problem the country faces worse. And so on. At this point they're all kind of blending together. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor, tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip. Kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get. So my friend does some extra negotiating, and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted, I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." We'll see the kid on r/legal advice in about 10 years. I'm 18 and my dad won a lawsuit when I was 9 and had money put in an account for my injuries when I came of age, and he's suing me to get it back. What are my options? Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of shit. A manufacturing/fab shop I worked for did a similar thing, albeit on a much smaller scale. They implemented a bonus, and a few months into it when we blew the goal out of the water they told us that the way they were calculating the bonuses was flawed, so they had to change it. We ended up getting a fraction of what we should have, and it was in the form of a tool allowance that the company would manage and let us use to purchase our own tools. Probably so they could claim those purchases on their taxes. There was never any contract, so there wasn't much we could do. I'm so glad I left that shithole. I worked at a civil firm and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant asshole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable shitholes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many people. Trying to defend this indefensible asshole against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills, and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Family lawyer here, associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had mom. But didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called, but it deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. Child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts. Public defender. Definitely yes. Raped his own children. This post applies to several people I've defended. What are you supposed to do as a lawyer when the person you're defending is 100% guilty of such horrible things? Do you really need to defend them? It's kind of mind-boggling to me that someone would willingly defend them. Yes. You believe in the system. Your job is to ensure due process occurs. Fair trial. The likelihood of them being convicted is significant. Your job is to make sure they don't get railroaded into it and that others don't get railroaded into it. Social Security disability attorney here. I've had this feeling more than once. Representing a guy who was a registered sex offender. He was in his 50s when convicted, victim was under 14. He was denied disability. He was always nice and courteous, but I just despised every second in his presence. Clients who lie to me, or the judge, particularly about drug use. I've got your medical records. I can see all your blood tests and urine tests. I can see what you have admitted to your doctor. If you're not going to tell the truth, to your own lawyer, how am I supposed to help you? P.S. 99% of the people I represent probably deserve disability. We are all one medical problem away from never working again, never enjoying life again. Be kind to one another and don't take your health for granted. Not really. If I for some reason can't stand someone, I'm not taking their case. Once I do represent someone, I begin to identify with his side and his version of the story. There's some psychological mechanism behind it, that once you take a position, you'll go to great lengths to justify this position both to yourself and to others. Don't know the English term for that. That's a bias you need to be aware of in order to calculate the risk for your client, because you tend to overestimate your chances of winning a dispute/lawsuit once you've found arguments for the case. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because client didn't take my advice. Maybe client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction. To save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases I am rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. You win some, you lose some. Or if client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or, in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up, and I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where client has unreasonable demands or expectations and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because, reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being an asshole. I'm an intern at a PD's office. You get these kinds of cases a lot. There are asshole clients who lie to their attorneys, disobey very clear and simple instructions, get mad and demand Nelson hearings or file frivolous complaints with the bar. Then there's clients who are nice enough, but are clearly guilty and a danger to everyone around them. Trigger-happy armed robbers, sexual predators, etc. The PDs fight like hell for these clients, as they should, but they also sleep just fine when they're found guilty and get put away. There's a dude I'm doing work for currently who's looking at an anywhere from 25 years to life without parole, and while I'm gonna do my best to make sure his discovery is in order so he can get the fair trial he deserves, I fully expect him to rot and I'm not terribly sad about it. I prosecuted 2 cases against a defendant for meth possession. They were slam dunks. Guy got arrested by the same officer at the same location and made the same admission. It was literally the same trial. He had several priors and faced a minimum of 2 consecutive prison sentences of 10 years each. He faced 20 years. I hoped he would be acquitted because, A, that is a fucking insane amount of prison time for a small amount of meth, B, he was a vet who was injured in combat, and, C, he was relatively young and had to use a colostomy bag. My asshole boss wouldn't allow me to deviate from the office policy plea offer. Defendant goes to trial and is quickly found guilty. He should have testified. BCI wouldn't have objected to anything. The kicker was that when the first verdict was read, he let out a long, loud fart. It was the saddest fart I've ever heard. He ended up getting 10 years total. BC the judge ran them concurrently. After that, I got chewed out by my office for not arguing with the judge that he had to run them consecutively. I used to do plaintiff's work in credit card debt collection cases. Yes, I was that asshole. One time we were suing a guy for $3,000. He had some type of cancer of the throat and had one of his jawbones removed. He was in really bad shape. Prior to the hearing, the guy told me he quit paying when his wife left as she couldn't deal with his cancer. Also, his church had collected all they could to help him, $1,000 in cash. Also, he said he was judgment-proof, which means he's so poor that there was no way my client would ever see any money from him, extremely common. I called back to the office with his proposed $1,000 to satisfy the debt in full and my boss said, "I don't give a fuck about his jawbone. Tell him $2,000 or no deal." The trial was brutal. He broke down crying when I got him to admit he intentionally didn't pay his credit card bills due to his medical bills. He was clearly broken. I pitied the guy so much but still did my job and won. We got the full $3,000 in our judgment. BTW, our client was a third-party debt buyer, meaning they bought the debt for $0.02/$1.00 of debt. This means that our client was rewarded $3,000 plus court costs plus attorney's fees for something they paid $60 for and will never be able to collect on. P.S. Missing jawbone aside, this pathetic scenario was/is not at all uncommon.